Okay everyone, so like I mentioned, we're going to be going over what states are in React, and I'm going to tell you guys straight off, this is my favorite topic to teach because I remember when I was learning React and I first learned about states, I was completely mind blown because that was the point where I was like, okay, React is good. Or not only React, but I was like, okay, I really need to learn some sort of JavaScript framework because this is way better than how you usually do it in just vanilla JavaScript. So in this video, we're going to be going over states by going over a couple examples. I really want to emphasize on you guys understanding what states are, so that whenever someone just asks you, oh, what is the point of creating a state in React, you're going to be able to answer it with the knowledge and ability of implementing it as well inside of your code. So what exactly are states? Well, the best way I find to explain a state in React is just a variable, right? Now, it's technically not just a variable, but think of it as just a variable that holds data. And it can be either a string, it can be, I'm going to create just an example here, for example, the variable name, right? Or actually, I'll create a variable called age. And we can obviously set it to be a number. We can set any variable to be any kind of type, right? We can set it to be a string, a boolean, whatever we want. But an age is a number. So we have this age variable over here, right? If I were to display this, I could easily display it in my screen, like I showed you guys in the past, by just putting some JSX over here, and it will show 0 whenever I go to the page, right? This is the browser, you can see, it's just displaying the amount that we have over here. Let's try doing something really cool over here. Let's try creating a button, right? A button that when you click on it, it will increase the age. So to create a button, you could just create a button tag like normal HTML, put a text inside of it, and close it like this. Now, what will happen is you'll see that in our browser, now we have this little button that obviously nothing happens when we click on it because we haven't implemented anything for it. Now in React, very similar to how you do in normal JavaScript, you can pass what is known as an onClick function to this button. Now, properties and inputs such as a button, in normal JavaScript you usually put it with like lowercase, but in React you put it like this, with on being lowercase and the C being capitalized. So this is really important because we're going to be, for the first time, dealing with events in React. So what is an event? Just something that happens as a response of something else. So in this case, we're going to do something after we click on this button, right? So what do we want to do? Well, we can pass a function inside of this onClick that will be called whenever we click on the button. So we can just create this function over here. I'm going to call it increase age, and it will be just a normal arrow function, which we can now just pass it inside of here, just like this. Now, what do we want to do with this increase age? Well, we basically want to, whenever we click on this value, we want to increase the value of age by 1 each time, right? So intuitively, if you know JavaScript and programming, you would just do something like this, right? Age equals to age plus 1. If it's 0, then we'll set it to be equal to 0 plus 1, which is 1, so age will become 1. If it's 1, then it will be 1 plus 1, which is 2, right? So it's increasing by 1 each time. Now, we want to also console log over here the value of age after we increase each time, just so we have an idea to see if it's working or not. So let's check out to see if this will work, right? It should work because we're increasing the value and we're displaying the value over here. Now let's go to Google Chrome and let's try clicking on the button, and you immediately see that it doesn't work because you see over here it says 0, right? When it should be whatever value it is right now after clicking this button a bunch of times. So you may argue, okay, it's not changing because we set it as a constant. So let's try setting it as a let or a var, right? Constants obviously can be changed, so if we set as a let or a var, it should work, right? Okay, let's test it out. It still doesn't work. It still doesn't work. But doesn't mean it's not changing the value of this variable over here. Well, no, it is actually. Because if you go to the console log over here, it is actually increasing by 1 every time you click on this button. So you're probably really confused because this is exactly how I was when I was learning states. Why is the variable changing value, but whatever is in my screen isn't changing as well? I thought that this should be representing this variable. Well, it is, But there's a point that you need to understand with React. React will render this component over here initially once. And what do I mean by render? It will just display the UI. It will generate the UI for this page once. So what happens is, initially, it will look at whatever the value of age is, it will see it's 0, and then it will display 0. It doesn't matter how many times we change the value of this variable. React doesn't know that it needs to re-render to show whatever value it is currently, right? So it renders once, and we can change the variable, but changing a variable value doesn't mean React will re-render because of it. So that's exactly what states are. Because if you were using normal JavaScript, whenever you change a variable like this and you wanted to change something in the HTML to show the value of the variable, you would do something like saying document.getElementById, or I don't know, using a query selector, and then manually changing the HTML. But here, you don't have to do that, because in React, if we wanted to create something like this, we could very simply just use a state. So in order to use a state, we have to come over here at the top and import from the React library. So I'm gonna say React, and we're gonna import what is known as a useState hook. So there's this concept in React called a hook, and I'll obviously go way more in depth about what hooks are when we have our hook section of this course. Just know that when I mention a hook, I'm just talking about a function that for now, all you have to know is that it's a function that starts with the word use. Later on, I'll obviously talk about it more, but for now, just keep that in mind. So the useState hook over here is what we use to create a state. And in order to create a state that, for example, in this case, a state for the variable age, we would have to do the following. We would have to say const, then open and close square brackets, then set it equal to useState, and open and close parentheses. So we're just calling the useState function, and this useState function will return some information that we're getting inside of this square bracket. So what kind of information can we get? Well, we can get a variable, and we can call it whatever we want, right? In our case, the variable will be called age. And then we need to create a function that will be used to change the value of this variable. Now that definitely sounds confusing if this is the first time you're using states, because that's how I felt. But just know that the standard is, if you have a variable, for example, called age, you put over here a function that is called set, and then the name of the variable. For example, set age. Now you'll see what this does in a bit, but just know that this is how you structure the useState. So then over here, you can put an initial value to the variable. Remember that initially we set age to be equal to 0. So this is where we put this 0, right? This initial 0 value. We put it over here. So now what we just did is we just created a state that is obviously a number because we set its first value to be 0. And we have a variable for it, and we have a function that is able to change its value. So here's where it gets good. If I want to display this age, I can still do it, right? It's exactly how it was before. I can just put age inside of here, and you'll see that it will display the 0, right? I'll just refresh the page, and you guys can see it says 0. If I change this to 1, it will show 1 because that's the initial value. But now what happens is, if I came over here to this increase age function, and I wanted to increase this age variable by 1 every time I click on the button, I could just say something like set age, call this function, and inside of here, I can just put whatever value I want age to become. So for example, I can say 5 by default, just say 5. And what happens here is, if I click on the increase age button, it will turn this into 5, right? And the reason why this is happening is because the whole point of a state is it is a variable that when its value changes, React will be notified. It will look to see if the value is different from what it was before. If it is, it will trigger the UI to re-render, to redisplay the whole UI, so that now it will include the new value for that state, which is amazing. And that's the whole point of creating a state. Now, obviously, I don't want to keep it as set age to 5, because all it's doing is it's changing from 0 to 5, no matter how many times I click on this. But one way I can make it increase every time I click on the button is if I were to come over here and I just said that the age will be equal to age plus 1, because it will get the current value and increase by 1. And you'll see that Now if I keep clicking on the button, it will keep increasing just like we wanted before. Obviously I could do something like subtracting, and it would do the exact same thing but the opposite way, as you can see. But it's nice, right? Because this is the whole point of creating states, and they're extremely useful. You'll be using them a lot in React. So there's also more use cases for a state. A really cool use case that I like to represent always is whenever you're using inputs, right? So for example, let's delete this code over here, and let's, instead of creating an age, let's just put an input inside of our React app. So I'm gonna say input over here, and I'm gonna close it like this. Now an input, as you might know, can be a lot of stuff, but in our case it will be an input of type text. Now that means that if we come over here, you'll see there's a text like input that we can just write on it, right? So what I want to do here is I want to be able to type on this input, and as I'm typing, I want to display a text that displays exactly what I'm typing on this input. So how would we do something like that? Well, we would have to create a state to represent that value. So let's come over here, just like how we did before, and let's create a state. So to create a state, you just do something like this, and since this will be a text, it will be a string, we just initialize it as an empty string, like this. The initial value will be this. So what we want to do here is we want to create a state that will represent whatever this input is. So let's give it a name. Let's call it input value. Obviously we could give any names, but in this case it just makes sense. And then we need to create a function that will change this input value. So we'll call it set input value. Now I want to display that input value. So I'll just come over here and say input value. And you'll see that nothing changes because input value initially is an empty string. But what I want to do is, as I type on this input, I want to change this input value by using the set input value function to be whatever exists inside of this input. So how would we do something like that? Well, I would come over here and say onChange. So if you worked with inputs before, you know that every input has an onChange, which is triggered whenever there's any change to the input. So a change could be you typing something on the input. So we can pass a function over here. So let's create a function for this. I'll say const, and I'll call it handle input change. Right? Create this function, handle input change, and we can just grab this and pass it inside of here. Now every input, when you have a function that is inside of this onChange property over here, it actually has an argument by default called event, which is an argument that, if you're familiar with HTML and JavaScript, it's used to grab information about the input. So if I were to say, for example, console log event dot target dot value, for those who know what this means, it will basically console log the value of whatever is currently written on the input. So this is really, it's used so many times in React, because whenever you want to grab something from an input that a user is writing, you do it like this. You grab it by saying event.target.value. And what is happening right here is we're calling this function every time there's a change, and we're console logging the value, meaning that now if I open up my console log, every time I type on this input, it will now console log whatever the value of this input is, right? Like automatically. I can delete it as well. I can write whatever I want, and it will be always console logging. So in our case over here, what we want is we actually want to set this value over here to be equal to this input value. So all we have to do is, instead of console logging this, we just say we want to set input value to be equal to that. And now magically, whenever I type anything on this input, it will now start displaying over here, which is amazing. Like it's completely useless to, in this example, to just show the string, but I remember I was so mind blown when I saw this for the first time that I had to show you guys. But this is the power of states, because every time the value of the variable is changing, it triggers a re-render and shows the new value in our page, right? So in this case, we won't be, whenever we do something like this, it would be mostly to try to grab information from like inputs, so we can, I don't know, there's like a form in the website and we want to grab whatever the user typed on the form. We can do it this way. But I found this to be a good example whenever you're learning states. Okay, so we just went through 2 different examples on how the useStateHook can be used, but I know that you might still be doubting its practicity or how important it actually is. So I'm gonna give you guys 2 more examples that are actually really cool and can show you the power of this. So the first example is, imagine that we have something like this. We have some sort of text in our screen that says something like, hi, my name is Pedro. Now obviously this is just an example, but imagine that we have this text in our screen and we want to be able to have a button over here that whenever we click on the button, it will either show or hide this text. So what I want is, I want to be able to click on this, and every time I click, it will either display this or hide it. So if currently it's being displayed, so if I click on this, I want it to now not display this anymore. And then if I click again, it will display this. Now, I know for a fact that if I was doing this with normal HTML and JavaScript, the way I would probably approach it is I would probably change it to CSS, or maybe remove the thing that completely from the HTML. It would be way more work than what we're gonna do over here, because with states, all I have to do is I just have to create a state just like this, but obviously the names here will change. We'll call something like, I don't know, show text or something like this, and then obviously this would be set show text, and then over here this would be a boolean, right? Because we want to either set this to true or false. So instead of having an empty string or a 0 for a number, for boolean we can start it out as true, right? Because we want to first show this text, and then if I click on it, I want to hide it. So now we have the state. So all we want to do in this case is we want to say, okay, if show text is equal to true, then display this over here. So if we were to combine what we learned in the last episode, where we talked about ternary operators, we could just say something like, if show text is equal to true, then we put the double ampersand because this is just a then, show this. This logic makes sense, right? And obviously we have to put the curly braces around here because we're now putting some JavaScript in the middle, right? So all this is saying is, if show text is true, then display this. So let's see if that works. We'll come over here. Obviously it's true, so it will be displaying. But if we set the state by default to be false, it will not show anymore. Now, another thing you can do is, obviously, with if statements like this, you don't have to say if this boolean is equal to true. You can just say if show text, and obviously it will work the same way, as you can see. But now the cool thing is, we want to be able to click on this button, and whenever we click on it, we want to be able to toggle between show text being true or false. So we could just create a function over here, right? By saying something like const toggle text or something like that, right? Just like how we did before. But actually, you can also just create a function anonymously inside of here. So what does that mean? Well, I can either create an external function and define its name like we did in the previous 2 examples, or directly inside of the onClick, I can do what is known as an anonymous or inline function, which is just a function like this that doesn't have any names. It's just a parentheses and a arrow and then the curly braces. And then inside of here, I can do whatever I want. I can, for example, come over here and alert a message saying, hey, and you'll see that every time I click on the button, it will alert the message, right? So this is also like used a lot in React. It's just a function that is created inside of some sort of event or some sort of prop, right? So in our case, we don't want to alert it. What we want to do is we want to set the show text to be true if it's currently false, and false if it's currently true. So how could we do something like that? Well, we could just use the current value of show text and say that we want the opposite of that, because if it's false, it will now become true. If it's true, it will now become false. So let's test it out to see if this is working, right? It will start out as true, so we are able to see the text. But if I click on this, it will set the variable to be the opposite of true, which is false. So now it's not displaying. And I can click again, and it will display. I can click again and not display. You don't understand how useful this is to many websites. There's so many UI things you can do that with this that is super easy to make because of how states work in React, and that's just an example of how cool this can actually be. Now you can even do more to this, right? For example, you can actually change CSS directly by using states. So what do I mean by that is, for example, if we want to scratch out this whole show logic and just make it always show the text, right? Something like this, we always show the text, but whenever I click on the button, now I want to make this text become green, and then when I click it again, I want to toggle back to black, right? So that would be hard with normal JavaScript, but it's super easy with using states, because then I can just create a state, let's call it text color, and the function will be set text color, and it will be a string because in CSS you can call colors like red or blue or whatever you want. And using what we learned in the previous episode, you can actually write CSS directly inside of your HTML or your JSX, right? So I could come over here to this h1 tag and I can just give this style prop like this and open and close parentheses. And over here, I can do whatever I want with this style, including give it a color. I can obviously set this to red by default, and it will, oh, it's broken. Oh, it's because we obviously there's no set show text anymore because we changed the name. But like I was saying, you can obviously set this to red by default, and you can see it works. But what we want to do is we want to use the state to change the color directly inside of here. So what we can do is we can just say text color is equal to the color is equal to the text color state. And now all we have to do is we just have to come to this on click and say that whenever you click on the button, we'll just set the text color to be red. And you'll see that if we set this by default to black, because the initial color is black, now when we click on this button, it will become red. So we're altering the CSS of our page very easily by using states. Now if I click again, obviously it's not changing because we're not implementing any logic for this. All we're doing is whenever you click on the button, it will set it to red. So if it's already red, all it's doing is setting to itself, which doesn't make sense. But to do something which mimics a behavior of it, like toggling between black and red, what we can do is we can use ternary operators, which is something, like I mentioned, we learned in the last episode. We can do something like saying if the text color is currently equal to black, then we want to set it to red, right? We just set it to red. But if it's not, so else, we set it to black. So really try to understand this logic over here. We're putting inside of this parentheses what color we want the state to represent. So what we're saying over here is if it's black, then we want to put red inside of this parentheses. If not, we want to put black because the color should be black. And if we run this, you'll see this is exactly what happens. We keep alternating between the colors, which is obviously the behavior we wanted. So those are the actual 4 examples I really wanted to bring to this episode. I don't know how long this episode is, but it shouldn't be a short episode because states are super powerful and will be really useful throughout our course. For example, in the next episode, we're going to be using states so much that I guarantee you will start feeling very comfortable with it by the end of that episode. So in order for you guys not to be confused, because I know some of you guys might still be confused with how states work, I'm gonna obviously, like I did in the previous episode, leave a little exercise here at the end so that you guys can do. I'll show you guys the result on how to solve the exercise, but obviously do it before you see the answer. And yeah, let's get into the exercise. Okay, everyone. So this is the exercise I want you guys to complete. So this is a very famous example of something you can use states for, which is a counter app. And I wanted to leave this as an exercise because the examples I showed you guys, I really didn't want to repeat a counter. But a counter is a very easy way to understand states. So I'm going to leave you guys to do this exercise. So basically what I want you guys to do is you need to create a state called count, which is a number, right? And similar to with the age, I want you guys to have 3 buttons in your screen. I want to be able to click on this increase button and see this number increasing. Then click on this decrease button and see the opposite happening. So the button decreasing, the number decreasing. And also when I click on this set to 0 button, no matter what the value of the number over here is, I want to set it to 0. And I want to be able to do all of that using states. So use everything we learned in this episode to do this, and come back whenever you're ready to see the solution. So yeah, if you're ready, now let's see the solution. Okay, so this is the solution to the exercise. As you can see, it's not super complicated. I didn't want to make a complicated exercise because we're going to be working with more complicated stuff in the next episode. But all you have to do is create 3 different functions. Each of them have their own purpose for the buttons. So the increase function, similar to the one we did before, it just increases the count by 1 and sets the count to be that value. Then the decrease does the opposite. It decreases the count by 1 and sets the count to be that value. And the set to 0, 1 is the one that is a little bit different because you just set it to be 0 no matter what. And what we did is we just passed all of them to the on clicks of their respective buttons. And now you can see that if I play around with this, I can now increase, I can decrease, I can go negative, as you can see, I can return to 0 no matter what by just clicking on that button. And it's a very simple counter app, but it obviously shows how quick it is to just create an app, something like this using React. So that's basically it for this video. I really hope you guys enjoyed it. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like down below and comment what you want to see next. Subscribe because I'm going to be posting 3 episodes a week, and it's a lot of work to make these episodes, but I really think you guys will enjoy it. I really hope this course will be able to help a lot of people, and yeah, that's basically it. I really hope you guys enjoyed it.